Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar presented by ASMGi and Security Scorecard. Today's webinar, we're going to talk about security ratings and cyber risk. And the old adage of you can't manage what you can't measure applies very much to cybersecurity. And so today we're going to talk about cyber risk and how you measure it and why that matters and what it means to your organization. Thank you again for joining us. Just real quick, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We will get to them either after you type it or at the end of the webinar during the questions period. So I'd like to introduce Frank Yako, CIO and heads up strategic initiatives for ASMGi. Why don't you take it away, Frank?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Paul mentioned, we're going to be talking about the whole idea of security ratings and as it states, your digital or public digital hygiene. This is a new and emerging area, and one of the goals that we have for today is to demystify this whole concept and hopefully enlighten everyone on why it's important and go into some of the details about the how. So before we dig into the details, I'd like to also introduce my colleagues today and the individuals representing Security Scorecard. So Isaac, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, how's it going, everybody? My name is Isaac. I'm one of the Security Scorecard panelists here to walk you through the platform today. Can everyone see my screen, or is it showing presenter mode?
Well, it's showing.
Perfect. So let me hop through really quickly. Today's presenters are myself. I'm going to be running through pretty much the slideshow, going over Security Scorecard and the current landscape of cybersecurity. We also have Kent Gottschall. He's the cyber risk rating specialist here at Security Scorecard. So if anybody wants to hop on, introduce themselves. Kent, now's the time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for taking some time here today. We look forward to kind of walking you guys through this quick webinar, walking through what a cyber risk rating is. We're here to kind of answer some questions, give you a high level understanding of what it is and how we help. So I guess maybe before we get into it, I'll hand it back to Frank and kind of get things going here.
Great, thank you guys. Thanks for joining the discussion today. So if we look at the next slide, we want to make sure that we identify what we'd like to have everyone take away from this discussion. So as we mentioned, we'll introduce the concept of what security ratings are and what that means, and also how that can be used by various entities. So we know we have a mix of organizations represented on this discussion today, and both from if you're providing services to someone, this is something that you should be familiar with or concerned about. If you're a consumer of services from someone, again, you should be concerned about what your security ratings or profile looks like. And then, if you're also a cyber insurance provider, who are you insuring and what is their security profile? So again, it's important from all types of different perspectives. Also, we'll drill into a little bit of what actually makes up security ratings and what that tells us about every business as well. And those are things that again, depending on your perspective, will mean different things. And then the next point is to look at how every organization can leverage this type of information and use that to ultimately improve your risk profile. So every organization has different profiles based on the type of business that you're in, or potentially the types of services that you consume. And it's important to understand, how that is perceived and viewed from the outside in, as we'll get into that term. And then the last point is hopefully take away, what you can do to actually leverage this type of information to improve your security rating and also improve and decrease the amount of risk that you might have for your organization. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Isaac to jump into a few details about what security ratings are and set some of the context for further discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for introducing everything. Thanks, everybody, for hopping on to today's webinar. And let's just hop into it. So the best way to frame the conversation is kind of these things that we were brought up like kind of knowing to fear, like don't swim in the ocean past a certain time for a shark attack, don't like stand out in the middle of a field because you might get struck by lightning. But nobody really talks about the odds of that. And then something that's emerging today is, what are the odds that you actually get hit with a data breach? So we actually found out that getting eaten by a shark is 1.37 million, getting struck by lightning 1 in 960,000, but actually experiencing a data breach is only 1 in 4. And there are a lot of new trends impacting cybersecurity, but really they're the ones that are mainly causing some worry out there are everything's starting to be digitized. We're on the IoT right now. Everything has an open API, so every customer can connect with their vendor. There's blockchain, biometrics, and of course, third-party risks, which is really one of the top factors contributing to insecurity today. Among the couple I mentioned already, transformation, a lot of people have to worry about compliance, which is really this ever-growing landscape that nobody truly has that hold on. Something that I've been hearing a lot actually is that it's really hard to find and retain really talented people on your team. So getting people hired, that's a challenge. And also threat actor resources is just growing every day. As the internet becomes stronger and stronger, so do the bad actors on the internet. And then before I joined Security Scorecard, I didn't really know the numbers behind cybersecurity. I always knew that it was just important, but I didn't really know that apparently 60% of breaches were caused by patches that weren't applied, or 43% that almost half of the workers that have been hit by a phishing attack have been actually caught by it. And that about 4 million is the average cost of enterprise data breaches. I'm not going to read this full slide. I'll let you guys kind of look at it for a second, but it's crazy. It's just how much this is a growing landscape, and kind of people are starting to realize that, like, oh, wow, we need to get in front of this before we're one of these statistics. So what today's threat landscape really looks like, I mentioned it before, is that there are a lot more skilled hackers out there that have an increased attack surface, right? Everything's on the internet. It was a lot harder for attackers to hit companies, and everything was just written down on pens and papers, not on the internet, not on the cloud, anything like that. And on top of that, now that the hackers have more attack surface, not being able to fight them off with cybersecurity talent is also becoming a huge factor in the threat landscape, just because of the fact that there aren't that many people out there anymore. And of course, every single compliance regulation that comes out is just people trying to figure out what they can do best, right? There's GDPR, CCPA. I know the US alone is probably going to start rolling out more compliances, just state specific, that kind of mimic CCPA. So this is just like an ever growing landscape. And the real problem behind it is that there is no gold standard to measure and communicate your security practice. You and your security team can buy a bunch of cybersecurity tools and then plug them in, or you can have you and your team working on cybersecurity, but there's no real way to say, like, hey, we took X measures and it helped us in A, B, and C way. It's really hard to communicate that up. It's also hard when you're having to report to people that aren't the most technically sound people in the universe. They could be very smart in other ways, but like sometimes cybersecurity just goes over certain people's heads. So that's actually half the reason why we created Security Scorecard. And the other half is just the current measures, the current methods of measuring cybersecurity fall short. In my time at Security Scorecard, the main things that I've learned that companies are doing are either A, they're sending out an Excel sheet which has a bunch of questionnaires on it. And it's either the answers are going to be point in time, so they could be correct, but they're correct for the date that you completed them, but you have no idea what they're going to look like in a week or a month from now. Or they ask for a report like a SOC 1, SOC 2, which, don't get me wrong, companies having these accreditations are fantastic. It's great to work with companies that are SOC accredited, but it's also kind of the same problem, that it's a point in time assessment, that this company has that SOC accreditation from, let's just say, 3 months ago. Everything could have changed in those 3 months, and that's not going to be reflected on the SOC report. So a lot of companies are starting to realize that they don't really have that much visibility into the companies they're working with, and they're starting to ask for more of this visibility instead of once a quarter asking them to fill out this Excel sheet or asking for an updated SOC report.
I think
Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
I was going to say one really good point here, right, is, besides being point in time, right? You send a questionnaire, answer a questionnaire. The answers that you give today are different from tomorrow, which are going to be different from 6 months, right? Where is that visibility between that time? Second, let's, to be honest, right? They're kind of subject to being biased. If somebody needs this questionnaire, to sign a contract, or there's a purchase order on the line and the only thing standing between it is an assessment, well, you better believe they're going to give you the answers you want to hear, opposed to telling you the truth, right? And how do you just now validate these answers without saying, hey, how do I get some information to confirm that these are correct? So besides being, just that point in time, it really is subject to being biased. I'm sure a lot of you, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I'm sure a lot of you have either filled out questionnaires or you've reviewed them. They're time consuming. It's just kind of like, hey, let's get this over with. Let's just kind of push it through. We look at the risk, we understand it. And that's really, the shortfall of today's, assessment process. So I figured I would just chime in here, kind of give you that one little tidbit.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit, Kent, but just Ken, you're breaking up a little bit. But
process itself. Geez, we go on mute here.
Yeah, just to add to what Kent was mentioning, the thought that the point in time model would sustain itself and be a going forward model is really a legacy or a fallacy anymore. Especially with the things like continuous improvement and continuous design and development types of activities with applications. There's no way that you can assume that because someone filled out some type of assessment or even completed some type of vulnerability assessment of their application, even a day ago, is still valid, and that there's not risks in the services that you might be, or solutions that you might be consuming. So that's really one of the main points that we want to stress today, is just how fluid the world has become, and that you can't count on the ways that things were done in the past is really the net of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree with you guys. Thanks for bringing up such great points. And I guess to continue on, according to Gartner, and I like to frame this about like why security scorecard is important, like who are we? It's by 2022, security ratings are actually going to become as important as credit ratings when assessing the risk of a business relationship. I personally moved into an apartment a couple of months ago. They asked for my credit score 4 times individually. They asked for my parents' credit score, and they asked for anybody who was a reference for me to get into this apartment's credit score. It's baked into everyday life at this point, and it's crazy to think that such a thought leader in the industry is already saying that literally a couple of months away, 2022, security ratings are going to become as important as credit ratings. But really, how do cyber risk ratings help? So what Security Scorecard does is we instantly rate, can understand, and continuously monitor the security risk of any company worldwide. We do it in a non-intrusive way from an outside-in point of view, because this is the way that the hackers are looking to try to break into these companies. They don't have access behind the firewalls. They're looking to see what company has a weak external-facing cybersecurity, and then they try to break in based on that. And we've actually found that companies with a better cyber risk rating are more resilient. We did a study over 3 years. We cross-examined the breaches in the organization they got hit on, and then they found out that companies with an F are actually 7.7 times more likely to be breached than companies that have an A. And it's crazy to already think about that. There's already that correlation between Fs and breaches. And there are companies nowadays that are starting to realize, like, hey, we have to stay on top of this just to keep us safe.
Just to maybe go back to that slide real quick, Isaac. So, a question for the participants on the webinar today is, would you do business with someone if they had, even if it was a C, or, if they hadn't, even below that, a D or an F in their risk profile? Because if you count on those entities for part of your supply chain, or even a critical solution that supports your business, how can you be assured that that's not going to ultimately impact your organization and your ability to do business? That's really, again, just to kind of really hit home on that point today. That's one of the things that we really want you to take away from this discussion, is that how critical it is to really understand who you're doing business with, And also, that there's organizations that would expect the same type of information about your organization as well.
And actually, a lot of companies are starting to put security scorecard data in the contract, where it's you must maintain an A or a B level to continue working with our company, with our product, whatever like that. So it's already evolving into not only just cybersecurity, but it's making sure that you're staying on top and in a good relationship with all of your vendors. And speaking about vendors, this kind of helps frame the landscape and really show you the attack surface that there is. So this is you as a company. These are all the things that you need to flourish as a company. You need R&D, you need customers, support, marketing, insurance, legal, the whole 9 yards. And then each of these business units have to outsource some of their responsibilities to your third parties. So all the bubbles on the outside, on the outermost ring, are your third parties. And a hacker really only needs to break into one of them to find a backdoor into you. And hopefully this never happens, but that could happen. That could lead to a breach. And then on top of that, a lot of companies are starting to take it even further by wanting to monitor their third parties, AKA your own fourth parties, because it's the same link. If your third party is sharing information with their third party and your fourth party gets hacked into, they can backdoor into their third party and then back to you. So it's really this ever evolving landscape that you always want to make sure you're staying on top of, because it's always going to be growing.
And I think there's some good examples of that happening over the, this past year. I mean, everyone's probably heard of the SolarWinds, attack. Also the, what's recently happening with Microsoft and even Exchange, as well as then, the Kaseya attack, where again, they're going after entities that provide services to other entities, and then just going and ultimately spidering into, those organizations, even though those organizations that are being affected might not even be aware that the entities they do business with even use some of those solutions. And kind of along with that, this past a week ago, we did an actual webinar on application security. And it's amazing how many organizations don't even understand the software solution, especially with SaaS and shadow IT, that their organizations use as part of their business. And that alone are risk elements or attack surface. So, if an organization that you do business with doesn't even know what they use to support their business, and that in fact becomes compromised, then that just can trickle down to your organization. So again, all these things are interconnected, which is really what Isaac demonstrated with this slide.
And also to bounce off of that, it's not even just the large IT companies that are getting hacked and like breached and ransomware anymore. It's companies like JBS, like one of the largest meat distributors in America. It's these companies that not just have information on other companies, just companies that if you disrupt them, it's going to be causing millions of dollars in just loss of profits because they cannot function without their supplies. So it's just ever growing in all these different ecosystems, which is just crazy to me. So how does Security Scorecard do it? We have a proprietary software that really gathers as much threat intelligence data as humanly possible using our non-intrusive methods. We take the data, normalize it, and score it using our patented machine learning algorithms. And then based on that data, the businesses are graded and benchmarked against each other. A nice little diagram that shows it. Starting at the bottom, going up, we have sensors that crawl the entire internet, fingerprint any vulnerabilities and any emerging threat we make sure to collect, and then we use our IP attribution, normalize the data, score it, and then put it into these 10 risk factors, stuff like application security, network security, endpoint security. And then we also have more dark web stuff like hacker chatter, leaked information, and then you get scored on these 10 factors. And then once you have that score, it'll just roll up to your overall grade. And then just to kind of go in deeper about it, because this usually raises a couple of questions, what are the risk factors we look for? So like I mentioned, the big ones are application security, network security. A lot of my customers are really starting to look into IP reputation as well as patching cadence. So I'm not going to read it word for word, but we are looking at a lot, and we continue to expand what we're looking for every day.
And maybe just real quick, Isaac, sorry to interrupt you. So, one of the things that it's important to recognize is that there are all these different risk factors. So an organization could be doing great on one of those boxes, say patching cadence or even network security, but if they're failing in one of the other areas, it doesn't matter how much money they've invested in one particular segment of their technology environment, or even one of their educating users, or maybe they're not educating users and they have the best IT security on in infrastructure, but again, if they're susceptible to whatever the weakest link is in their environment, that ultimately can translate into a problem for that organization and be a huge risk to them.
Yeah, exactly. These 10 risk factors are what hackers are looking for to break into companies. So it's not that just like, oh, make sure you bolster your application security. It's more of a holistic point of view. Make sure everything is buttoned up as tightly as you can get it, and you won't be a target because you'll be a lot harder to break into. And just a quick summary of what the top level view of Security Scorecard looks like. You can see not only your own company's grade, but you can see all the companies that you're working with, and you can see the score distribution, how many are actually in the platform or not in the platform. And then this is just a very single pane of glass before really going fully into Security Scorecard. But something we do help with is reporting, because I know a lot of you guys have to do reporting up or around, and we make sure it's a super simple to understand, really just A through F letter grading system that you can hand to anybody and they will understand what it's saying. You know, A's are good, F's are bad, C's are average. So specifically for this company, if you handed this over, you would know specifically where you would want to focus on. You could say DNS health and application security are primary, and then patch and cadence, endpoint security, IP reputation are secondary. And we don't really have to worry about network security right now. So it helps game plan really what you want to focus on in the future.
So if we could just pause for a second, would be interested for all the participants or attendees of the session today. Have you been the recipient of receiving a security ratings report from someone that you do business with, maybe that you have been made aware of, and that you then have to clean up your own environment in order to do business with that entity? Is that, if you have a chance, maybe respond in the chat if you've either seen these type of reports before, or if you've been the recipient of one of these in order to do business with a particular entity. Be interested in any feedback that anyone might have. Either raise your hand or just enter in the chat whether that's applied to you or not. All right, we have a little bit of feedback, but again, recognize if you don't want to participate, that's fine. But again, just like anyone in their own personal life, as Isaac mentioned, these are becoming more and more prevalent. You might not have all received something like this before, but it is something that's coming. That again, one of the reasons for having this discussion today is just to raise the awareness of these as emerging areas. So, Isaac, go ahead.
So what does Security Scorecard do to help once we find these vulnerabilities, right? So you can help propose a score plan, hand it out to whoever you need to hand it out to. If, let's just say, you're not the one who's in charge of actually fixing everything, you can say, hey, Security Scorecard found X, Y, and Z things for this score plan specifically. It seemed that the open DNS resolver, the fact that the site doesn't enforce HTTPS and the SSL certificate has a weak signature, are all the most important things for this company. So they can work on them first and then get the less important things to be kind of handed out as need be. But with Security Scorecard, we not only help you see the risk, but we also show you how you can solve the problems. And then on top of that, report the results. And then why use security ratings? Because ASGMi and Security Scorecard have a super strong partnership that actually helps you improve your own risk profile. So the way that we help is not only enterprise cyber risk management, looking at yourself, but we also help you with vulnerability management, remediation. Third-party risk management is a very popular use case of ours, being able to keep an eye on all of your third and then maybe fourth parties. We also help with cyber insurance, as well as the M&A cyber due diligence, because as we all know, I'm sure everybody's had a cyber insurance call recently where their premiums are skyrocketing. So that's always fun. And then if you're trying to bring on a new company, you want to make sure that the company you're bringing on and attaching your own name to is a safe company and you're not going to get hurt by them by any way. And then of course, on top of that, we do help with compliance because everybody needs at least a little bit of help with compliances. And then how we actually help is we have either one-time assessments where we can hand you off a report, here's how you're looking today, or we have recurring services where you would actually be a Security Scorecard customer, and we would be able to help continuously monitor not only yourself, but all your third parties and any of the other use cases that we help with.
So before we leave this slide, just maybe just drill into a few of these items. So, one of them, you talked about the actual reports that come out of the solution or the service. So one of the ways that can be used is to, again, understand, an entity's risk profile. And then, once you have that information, as you look at then sharing that within your organization, depending on what the areas are for improvement, that can help to ultimately manage the process of going through and remediating those vulnerabilities, the second point there. And depending on whether you want to have that being done by yourselves or potentially someone like even ourselves, ASMGi, we typically, you can directly help remediate vulnerabilities if those exist within your organization, or even manage the process of remediating those. And if you have third parties that provide those services to you in any way, to make sure that we can be a checks and balances for them or with them to ultimately resolve those vulnerabilities within your overall environment. If that includes a third party, risk management program, one of the things that we didn't talk about is the ability to actually do, the gathering of assessments and to also manage third parties in an ecosystem as a part of the types of services that we provide to clients. So that's another one where this goes hand in hand. So if you do have contractual arrangements with the third party to have a certain risk score in order to do business with them, we can help to manage that to ultimately make sure that they are in compliance. And then if they aren't, then some process for getting them back in compliance and monitoring that on an ongoing basis. Isaac mentioned the cyber insurance. Again, just like, on a personal note, in order to be able to even get cyber insurance in the future, it might be a requirement to have, either subscribe to these types of services or to have a certain score and maintain that. Otherwise, you might pay penalties or pay a higher premium, much like the different devices that monitor even your driving habits today. Those are obviously very popular and allow you to maximize the, if you are a safe driver, why pay for everyone else's bad habits? So that's just another one that's going to eventually trickle down to this type of scenario. I'll ask Kent maybe just to talk a little bit about how organizations are using this as far as mergers and acquisitions. Any examples that you could cite as organizations look to acquire other organizations?
Yeah. So apologies for breaking up before. Hopefully pausing my camera. Does that make me come in a little clear?
Yep, not a problem. Go ahead.
Perfect. So, from a cyber due diligence perspective, right? If you're interested in acquiring other companies, you're not going to reach out and say, hey, we're going to send you this cybersecurity assessment to understand the risk prior to even buying them, right? Or showing them any interest. So what the platform really allows you to do is view from this, hacker's eye, right? What do they look like? Is there vulnerabilities? Have they historically been trending at an F? Maybe they were previously an A and now they're an F, and that's a potential sign for you to kind of walk in the door saying, hey, what's going on, guys? I think we can make an opportunity to purchase this company. So from an M&A perspective, you see a lot of examples where there's poor due diligence done. One really clear example that I'm sure, everyone remembers is Marriott. Marriott acquired, I believe it was Starwood or Star Hotels, and that ultimately led to the demise of Marriott because during that due diligence process, there was risk that wasn't remediated or wasn't identified, and that risk essentially tied back to Marriott, which leaked, I want to say it's hundreds of thousands of records. So understanding that due diligence is massive. And I think, this tool gives you that visibility without even having to ask questions, right? You get that hacker's eye view. So now you can see it with, with little to none communication.
Thank you. And that's just, one example, but that repeats itself, all the time. if a organization is looking at doing an acquisition, understanding, how whether they have committed to, solidifying their risk profile and their security or not could be important in the investment or in even remediating those issues or the liability that acquiring organization might be assuming as part of that process. Also, even tying back to the discussion we were having about assessments, someone could answer something from an assessment standpoint, and maybe that was just a point in time, and they just decided to either stop investing in the security tools that they need to maintain their business, or have cut back on their operational teams to actually implement those. That could be a symptom based on what type of risk profile they show using this type of approach. And again, that's something that most organizations will not readily admit to, or have a way of even knowing if they were the acquiring company, or just even like this we made mention about the supply chain. There's no way of really knowing without something like this, what type of risk you're assuming when you're looking to do business with someone. So that's why it's so important to have that awareness. We referenced the hacker eye view. This is something, even when I was explaining the actual way that this is the methodology that's used to gather this type of information. This is not something that Security Scorecard or anyone is manufacturing this data. This is data that's readily available through the internet, publicly available, correlating information from all those different sources that were on that one slide, and then putting that all together to represent what that risk profile looks like. One of the things that is really important in this type of model is the transparency as well. Security Scorecard makes available the methodology that they use for developing this type of profile. Again, much like the credit reporting agency. So, the fact is that, this is information that is readily available, and we mentioned, multiple times the hacker eye view. These are things that the hackers and bad actors do use to determine who their targets are and how they could basically exploit those organizations. So it's you could think that you have a good security profile as an organization, but this could be a litmus test for actually demonstrating that. And then, we talked about, the idea of using this to also facilitate investment within an organization. If you've been having problems as a CISO in getting any type of funding for your programs or the things that you're recommending, this is a way, again, of demonstrating that you might have some vulnerabilities, that what effect it could have on you as an organization, and that it's a way to help to justify any type of investments as well. So that's just something else to keep in mind. And then, the last point, as far as the how to go about doing this, we highly recommend doing this on a recurring basis. Like we mentioned, the one-time assessments are helpful to get a baseline, but it's also important to be able to do this on an ongoing basis, so that not only can you demonstrate that any investments that you are making are moving the needle as you identify those vulnerabilities and remediate those, but also to do that on an ongoing basis. We always say that you have to operationalize any type of investments that you make, whether that's in the services that you're acquiring or the tools that you're investing in. And unless you have a way of validating that those are in fact moving the needle or helping your organization, it's difficult to do that without some type of ongoing measurement of that, which is really what we're referring to here. So that's just wanted to make those couple of points as we go through this discussion. So I know we still have a little bit of time on the webinar, and we have a few more points to make, but I don't know if Isaac, if you're in a position to maybe even reference a couple of the reports in a little bit more detail, that or even go into the platform itself. Is that something that you'd be in a position to do, just to show a few examples of some of the things interactively that are possible?
Yeah, happily, 100%. Do you want me to finish up the slideshow, or you want me to do that?
Yeah, let's jump out to the solution, and then we could come back to the PowerPoint.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so nobody can see my password, hopefully. So let me log into Security Scorecard.
Good move, Isaac. Good move. And Frank, I see while he's pulling it up, there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to address that now or if you want to wait till the end to kind of answer them all at once.
Sure. Why don't you want to hit that question
Yeah.
while Isaac's pulling up the solution?
Yeah. So the question for the group, right, was basically, citing specific insurances or instances where cyber insurance premiums were reduced by using Security Scorecard. So there is, the way that these ratings are being used today, the cyber insurance companies, right, they don't have this historical data like a car insurance company does, right? You go to buy a new premium with a car insurance, you're looking at, this company. First thing they do is they look at how many accidents have you been in, how many tickets have you got, have you totaled any cars? And then they use that historical data, right, to figure out what am I going to charge you? The same concept applies to cyber, besides they're missing the historical piece, right? They'll look at, okay, well, what size company, are you? Ultimately, how much data is potentially going to be at risk? Is there sensitive data being, shared and stored across the organization? They use that data and then they take this cyber risk rating to really get a, clear sense of visibility, saying, well, where have you guys been trending over the past year, over the past 2 years, over the past 3 years? They're going to look at that. And, I have customers that, kind of go back to the cyber insurance company saying, hey, this was one of your questions last year. You asked me if we were using Security Scorecard or a cyber risk rating tool. We said no. Well, we are now using that. We've, can showcase our grade is improved from a C to an A. It gives you that sort of leverage. Now, the cyber risk rating, right, isn't 100%, of the data that they use to underwrite the premium. You can have an A, you can go ahead and, have everything else checked for the box. That doesn't guarantee you, these cyber insurance companies, ultimately, they're the Fortune 500, Fortune 50 organizations out there. They're always going to have the upper hand. Really what this rating does is it gives you something to kind of showcase to them that they're already using to underwrite the premium. So, without giving out specific customer names, I can just say recently, I've had at least 2 customers prior to their renewal come up saying, hey, we were actually able to renegotiate our contract after showcasing we improved our score by 2 letter grades. We showcase that we're monitoring our score. We're looking at the same data they are. So then it's reducing risk across the board. From Security Scorecard standpoint, an early investor of ours was AXA, right? And that's something I can disclose. And they're a full-blown, powerhouse of an insurance company across the world. And then they started using this data to help underwrite their premiums. And across the board, every large cyber insurance company, in the United States, in the world, is leveraging this sort of data today. So hopefully that kind of gives you some sort of understanding of where it really ties back without having to disclose, customer names and other references.
And that's something else, when we go into the solution itself, there's a concept called followers that you'll see once we go into the solution. And it's important to know that could be, if you do look on the screen, I know it might be a little hard to see, but the 279 followers, that could be entities that are doing business with you. That could be actually insurance companies that are providing, some type of, policy to you. So, the point is that, it's anonymous. We can't divulge, who the users of this solution are that might be following you. But the reality is that is the world that we live in, in today's, brave new world. So, that's just important to know. So hopefully we answer the question, but it is important to recognize that this is the type of model of how entities are doing business. Again, the same way we were talking about the assessments, the same applies to cyber insurance companies. You look at all the different incidents or breaches that have occurred this year, especially with ransomware. They're under siege now because of the fact that they did not have the type of visibility without a solution like this to assess, whether the individuals that they're providing coverage to were doing the things that they represented in the assessments or the policy application process. So they cannot afford to just do this blindly any longer. And that's why these type of things are so important. So Isaac, I'll turn it over to you to go walk through a few things on the solution.
Thanks for helping frame the conversation. You are 100% right. This is a big number to look on. And the only reason I pulled up New Tech One is because they're honestly one of the more perfect scorecards to show that really show everything that we're picking up, because they're a large company with a lot of followers and they have a pretty decent amount of issues. But at the top, you can see their overall grade is a D68. It's not the best score in the world, but you can actually drill into any of these 10 factors that we look for. So specifically, if you wanted to, you can drill into network security. And you can see everything that we look for is in gray if we didn't find it, and everything that we look for in black is what we did find. So specifically, let's just say we pick this up and you want to see what's going on. You can click in deeper, see the description, the risk, the recommendation. We'll compare to similar companies. And then we'll also allow you, let's just say, you found this on your own scorecard, you fixed it. You can just hit, I fixed this, type in a nice message to our support team. And that'll automatically kickstart a new manual scan. And if you are right and you did fix this, it'll be taken off your scorecard in anywhere between like 24 to 48 hours, I believe, at this point.
Yep.
But
I think,
what's up?
Not to cut you off, Isaac, but I think one really important piece, right, especially for someone that maybe is just seeing this concept or this, space of solution, right, for the first time. What really we're doing here is, we're taking that top level domain. So when you're looking at the scorecard, right, you see the D, the 68, that's, high level enough. Just like if you have children and they're in grade school, they come home with that A or B, everyone's happy. If they come home with a C, D, and F, it's another conversation. So that top level grade really is that dictating score that's going to say, okay, should we take a quick pause, accept the risk, or should we go ahead and, drill a little deeper and then maybe try and accept it as a business or proactively fix some of these issues? So that's the first big point, right? It's that top level grade, that D, that 68. The second biggest, point that I would take away from just this high level walk through the platform is underneath New Tech One is that newtech1.com, that top level domain. And why that's important is that is the only piece of information you need to get a scorecard on any company in the world. So if you're working for your company today and you said, you know what, I'm starting my own organization tomorrow and I'm going to sell sneakers. Well, if you went ahead and created a website, that's johnsellsneakers.com. Well, if you're not in the platform today and you put that top level domain up top, that's going to kick off a scanning process where we crawl the entire internet, look for every digital asset that you guys have some sort of content responsibility on, and then we scan it and monitor that from now until forever, right? Like this idea of continuously monitoring and then scoring back is in real time. It's not a point in time assessment. It doesn't require you to input any data. All it takes is that top level domain. So when you're just looking at this top, piece of the scorecard itself, where you see New Tech One, you see that top level domain, like that's fundamentally the hardest part of the platform itself. It's saying, what is the website of my vendor? What's the website of my organization? Or what's the website of that company I want to go ahead and acquire? That's the only thing you have to input. And then from here, you'll be able to see in real time what issues we have surfaced, what they've, historically done. And then, if you fix this, some of the issues or vulnerabilities, that's where you're going to see your score improve. But, Isaac just highlighted kind of an easy way to remediate issues within the platform. But if you don't tell us you fixed the issue, we're still going to see it. If you tell us that you fixed it, it's pulled off your scorecard within that 48-hour SLA. If you don't tell us, it's usually within 5 business days that we say, okay, yep, you guys patched this outdated operating system. We've identified that, we validated that you did fix it, and then we go ahead and pull it off your scorecard. So the concept of saying, hey, we don't need permission to monitor. We don't need permission or any data from you to capture this. Once you're in the platform, and keep in mind, we have 20 million or 12 million companies today that we continuously monitor, as we keep growing these ratings out, we're just getting all this historical data from now until forever. So enough of my little rant. I just wanted to make sure everyone on the call just had a really good high level understanding of what this rating is, how it helps, and really what we're surfacing within the platform today.
Yeah, and to add to that, so as I was mentioning a little bit ago about the way that we can use this as a checks and balances, is say that you'd have different entities within your organization that are responsible for network security or your patching, or maybe you use third parties for providing those services to you. We can actually help you manage the effectiveness of those services, making sure that if you do have critical vulnerabilities, that those are being remediated within a certain period of time based on maybe SLAs that you have with those entities, and that is in fact you're getting the protection and reducing the risk based on the commitments that they've made to you to manage your environment. So again, it can be used as a checks and balances for any of those types of services that you're receiving, and this is just a way to exemplify how effective the service is, because it doesn't matter who's providing these services to you. They are or are not remediating the vulnerabilities when all is said and done, and this is a way to validate whether that has in fact been the case or not.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys chiming in there. I think you helped really frame the conversation, helped really show the power behind Security Scorecard. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I think I'll transition back to the slide deck, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does anybody have any questions based on what they saw while I pull the slide deck back up?
Well,
Not all at once.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that I think individuals always ask is just really about the details behind understanding the different categories and how this is can be used. I think that that's something that if we had the opportunity to speak with you individually, we could drill into some examples on your organization, and you'll see. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, Isaac. So before we dig into that, so one of the things we just wanted to verify, based on this discussion today, was that you walk away with an understanding and appreciation of what security ratings are, and how they could affect you, how they could be. So I think we've talked about that. Also, how the ratings are used by different entities. We gave plenty of examples in the supply chain example, the insurance, how you could use this from an M&A perspective. So again, hopefully you understand and have some perspective on that. Also, why this is critical to every business. Again, this is not the things that you have control over your risk profile. You don't have control over the fact that this is information that's readily available to anyone about your organization. But the thing that you can control is what your risk profile is, if you choose to go and address those things and improve your profile. So again, going to the next point, I think we've explained, why it's to your benefit to improve your risk profile. It could be a condition of even doing business with you as an organization, especially as part of any due diligence process. And then the last point there, as far as a going forward plan, based on some of the use cases and examples that we walk through, those are just different ways that you can apply this type of capability to improve, your overall risk profile, and there's different ways to apply it. So hopefully, again, you walk away with an understanding of why all this is important, and then how to potentially leverage it on a going forward basis. And then the next thing, if you go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're offering, attendees for the webinar today is a complimentary detailed summary of your or detailed ratings report of your organization, and a session to actually walk through what that all means. So as I was mentioning, sometimes it's hard to really understand all the details that might be available through something as sophisticated as this solution, but this is an opportunity to have an actual complimentary, one-time complimentary report, and then a session to walk through and make sure that you understand what it's actually telling you about your organization. And that's something that we might be more than happy to provide for you. And then in addition to that, and if you're interested, we do have another webinar next week, a week from today, entitled "Impact of a Breach." And if you're if you want to put your name in the chat box or the question box, we'd be more than happy to register you or pre-register you for that. Again, it's another webinar as part of our ongoing cybersecurity series. So I think that's all the points that we wanted to make today. If we could just hit a few more questions before we wrap up, maybe let me just go back. So this is the information about the next webinar, and then just maybe hit a couple of questions before we wrap up here. So, I guess the first one is, just going over to the question box. I'll pose this to either Isaac or Kent. How are things added to this as far as as findings are identified? It goes through the platform. It actually goes and logs what the vulnerability is, and then ultimately reports that in your scorecard. Is that something that's relatively real time? I know you mentioned about the continual scanning, so that what kind of visibility does someone have if there's a recently released vulnerability out there or CVE? How does that correlate into the platform so organizations have a real time or close to real time awareness of what their environment might be at risk to?
Great question. I'll take a stab at here, Isaac, and if I miss anything, you can chime in.
Go ahead.
These findings, right? We surface, anywhere from 150 to 200 different findings, give or take, what we're adding into the platform. Every one of those findings has an individual cadence. And what I mean by that is, we can't port scan, 15 million companies 10 times a day and then surface it. Otherwise, we'd be blacklisted across the entire internet. So, our findings on malware are instantaneous. Other findings might be every 2 hours. So what it really comes down to is, on average, I would say it's between 24 and 48 hours for the majority of these findings. But there are certain issues like, new CVEs that we surface, malware egressing from your network, some of the network security issues, such as like not enforcing HTTPS or observed MongoDB services. That's going to be within every hour. So to give you a rough idea, I would say between a day or two is basically from when we collect the data, normalize it, make sure it's not a false positive, and then ingest it into the platform. Roughly, 24 to 48 hours.
Okay. All right. And another question that came in was, I know you mentioned, or I'll paraphrase it, you mentioned that the whole basis for this is the organization's top level domain. How does Security Scorecard go and identify what an entity's digital footprint is across the internet? And are there ever times where there's surprises there? Yeah.
So basically, what we're doing is we're crawling that entire IPv4 and some of the IPv6 space, looking for these IPs and domains that belong to a particular company. Regardless if you host on AWS or you have something on, through GoDaddy, if you're responsible for the content on there and we see the cell cert, if we see that sort of content responsibility, we now attribute it to your scorecard. Did I break up there? You guys still hear me?
Yep. No, you're good.
Perfect. So once we do that, that's in real time, right? Like your IP range can change from today to tomorrow. If you acquire a company or add a few IPs and domains, we're going to change that. What I would say is the most surprising piece when we're doing this sort of attribution is the fact that, when I walk through a demo and we say, hey, we've roughly found 10,000 IPs for you. Is that higher or lower than you're anticipating? I would say 95% of the time, it's going to be higher than they're anticipating. Reason being is you're working with vulnerability scanners and you're giving a pen test group IPs and domains that are, hosting critical infrastructure and that are important. You're not necessarily going to be looking at one of these IPs that was spun up, as a sandbox server from the old IT director a few years ago. He left the company, didn't tell anyone. You walked in the door and nobody knows it even exists. So when we surface those sort of, long lost digital assets, it's nice to kind of get a thank you Security Scorecard. Due to your wide net approach, we would have never even known it was out there. They decommission it on the phone, or after the call, and then it's kind of reducing risk in real time. So I would say that's probably the biggest surprise after we kind of capture these digital assets for the millions of companies we do today.
Okay, great. Thank you. One last question. If an organization, wanted to, demonstrate, again, paraphrasing, that they were actually doing something useful with this. I know we talked about a lot of different examples, but what would be the one way that they could, demonstrate that this was something that they should do, and how to communicate that within their organization, say to the C-level or the board level, that this is a useful investment?
Well, I would say, if you kind of looked at your detailed report, right? I think the offer on the table is you have a free detailed report. If you take a look at the scorecard, they're being alerted on this, and we have a D. I think the first thing is, from a brand reputation standpoint, you want to make sure you now can be proactive, fix these issues for the 100 companies that are
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit, Kent.
right? You don't know if they're competitors, vendors. This is better now. But basically, I would say, you see your grade, there's room for improvement, right? If it's not an A and a 99, there's issues. So taking that and looking at how many companies are watching you, I think it's a very easy way to get executives and, the board of directors to kind of, jump in and say, hey, this is important. We understand.
Okay, great. All right. I think that's all the questions that we have. Definitely appreciate everyone's attendance today. Hopefully you appreciate the value that a solution like this can provide you, and then how ASMGi can help you leverage that to ultimately improve the risk profile for your organization. So thanks, Isaac. Thanks, Kent, and thanks everyone for your participation today. And feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in taking advantage of that offer for all attendees. Appreciate your time today, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for having us.